Hello. So this week during our live class, our classmates discussed the result of their implicit test. So I know one of the tests we took this week was, this past week was the religious one, and what we identify as. The two categories were Christian versus Jewish. And one of the things I kind of discussed was just how, I guess, truthful the outcomes of these tests are. So I am Christian, and the results of the test showed that I identify more with Christian, or I have I'm more receptive, I guess, to the religion overall. And I know one of the factors that they tie in is just how quickly you're selecting options and responding, especially when it's tied into good versus bad. But I kind of wonder if like user error plays a role in these tests. So like initially the questions are very clear, very concrete, and then as you continue through the test, I kind of wonder if things like fatigue, or like if you're rushing through it, or just not really paying as much attention as you were in the beginning, towards the end plays a role in it. But again, since the results were congruent with what I do believe in and what I do represent as, it's really no argument there as to how true the results are. And I think kind of going back to the positionality statement and the DEI statement and the statement of philosophy, I think one of the things that I really honed in on was my religious beliefs and the role that I think religion plays in my perspective on working and education and just how I move in my day-to-day life. And I said this before a few classes ago, but I having to realize that just because I have a certain religious perspective or religious belief, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is going to share that same belief. And it gets a little wonky because if I'm holding that belief to a standard in the workforce or at school, and then someone else isn't really adhering to that standard, I'm like, well, why would you conduct yourself like that if the Bible says this or if God says this? And it kind of helps me realize, like, when I'm providing feedback to people or when I'm leading others or whatever the case is, I have to make sure that I'm separating my own like personal biases, especially as it relates to religion and just personal beliefs, and really just looking at like the facts. And I'm also kind of in a place where your religious beliefs do play a role in your work, and it's okay to incorporate that to a certain extent, as long as obviously it's not negatively impacting the workplace and just your relationships and things like that. But I've gotten more comfortable in my work to speak about God and like how he helps me through certain situations and how I see the workplace. And a lot of times, Christianity is the most common religion. Obviously there's different subsides of it, but overall, like, God is it's a very common religion and idea. So whenever I bring it up in the workplace, it's not that controversial for the most part, and people are able to kind of adapt to it, and we can have those conversations. And I'm kind of liking how society in general is becoming more open to your religion in the workplace, or like your own personal beliefs and culture and stuff like that. Because years ago it was just very much church versus state, separating the two. But now we're realizing like these things do play a role with how we perceive the workforce, or how we maneuver in how we maneuver in I'm sorry, perceive the workforce, or how we maneuver like in school or education or whatever the case is. So that was kind of one of my biggest takeaways from this week, is just how can we incorporate our own religious and cultural beliefs in our day-to-day practice, while also being respectful that everybody doesn't share those same beliefs or backgrounds.